Welcome to the BrightWord Books podcast. BrightWord is a leading platform for diverse storytelling, where voices from all backgrounds can share their unique narratives and connect with readers from around the world. Follow our regular podcast updates, where we strive to foster a literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Larry was involved with product development in a pharmaceutical company, and one of the products he developed, DialPak, is a successful pill dispense package, now in the archives of the Smithsonian Institution. Larry is licensed to practice as a patent agent of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and he's written and prosecuted patent applications for a number of clients. All patents, of course, solve problems, so this is a natural domain for Larry to occupy. Indeed, curiosity about unresolved problems informs several of the essays in his book, Musings, Vietnam, Conjectures, and more, which is a heartfelt attempt to reconcile the war with his own experience of it and to examine its teachings for today's conflicts. We're delighted to have him with us today. Larry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John.
It's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to meet you.
Perhaps to start out, I'll ask you, why Vietnam? Why was that your subject matter?
Well, to put it simply, that's just simply been a lifelong quest of mine, not a single moment of interest. I was a participant in that war, which was at the center of a cultural revolution during the 1960s, when I was in the early 20s, some of my formative years. As I mentioned in the book, I am a part of the lost generation, the generation that grew up in the affirmation of the greatest generation, my father's generation. And that was a generation that won World War II with great sacrifice. World War II is generally considered to have been a, quote, holy war in the context of good over evil. This was a culture where I grew up, where the terms honor and duty were very much relevant. Those words today are rarely spoken outside of the Marines, actually. Vietnam is often viewed as a contentious war. It was a significant focus of the protest movement in the 1960s. This is where young people perhaps began to express their opinions, perhaps for the first time, even. And the 60s were the formative years of what I call the me first generation or mentality of the 1970s. I could sort of name it the selfish generation. At the same time, men drafted into the military, or this is at the time of Vietnam, in the 1960s. Young men were drafted into the military, whereas today military is a volunteer service. Those that go to work today are those that have chosen that path. Not so in my time, even in wars of earlier times that we have participated in. At the time of Vietnam, which followed the Korean War, some young people abandoned their citizenship and escaped to Canada as much to protest what they felt was an ill-conceived exercise as to avoid being drafted. I took a different route. I felt that it was the test of my generation, the time to me to step up, so to speak, as I saw my father and my uncle before me, one in the Pacific, one in Europe, had also stepped up. So I had a duty, and World War II was a clear-cut moral challenge, and the conflicts since that war, the conflicts of the Cold War, were not so clear-cut. They have been fuzzy in the public mind, and certainly in my mind. I think the central question of the piece that I wrote was, did 58,000 of my colleagues in arms die in vain? And I believe my grandchildren deserve an answer to that question.
Interesting. And I think the word that you use there, fuzzy, is telling. I think we can all relate to what you mean by that.
Good.
So you talk about conjectures. Help us understand, what do conjectures or imagination have to do with understanding the war or understanding different peoples?
Well, I think conjectures raises the question of fuzziness. That was a word that we've already used. If there's a central theme to this whole thing, it has to do with the fact that life is about complexity. And that I think what is attempted by most of the exercises or the essays is an attempt to try to work through some of the complexity. I don't think there are easy answers or even the answer to anything, but I think it's worthwhile to mull over them, to muse about them, to think about them, spend some mental exercise time. I think that's revealing in many ways. I think that's what I attempted to do with the piece on Vietnam, was try to settle the issue in a way that I could feel comfortable with, and I could try to relate that to what's going on today in Ukraine and maybe in the world today to someone younger than me.
Absolutely.
How does that relate to other issues in the book? Well, I think they're all about fuzzy things, about subjects that have not been resolved for various different reasons. And I just take them on. Why I wrote about them. I was puzzled by them. I spent some time thinking about them, and I wrote most of these for no other purpose, frankly, than to consolidate my own thoughts about them. The fact that they ended up in a book has a lot to do with a friend of mine who kept urging me to publish it. That's how it got to where it is.
Absolutely. When you think about the fuzziness, I think there's the facts of what happened, let's say, in a conflict, either in Vietnam or Iraq or Ukraine or anywhere in the world these days. There's the facts of what's happening, and there's the understanding or imagination of what's happening or what happened. Do you think there are folks in the world, Larry, that take advantage of the fuzziness, that they use the fuzziness to advance their own goals, their own positions?
Well, of course, I do think that. I make a case in the Vietnam piece that what's pivotal about what was pivotal in the case of Vietnam, and I think is pivotal in all wars, is character. There's the grounding of a person who's making those pivotal decisions, he or she. And I think Harry Truman is a good example. I don't think Harry Truman thought of himself as president as much as a person trying to do the right thing. And I think that's kind of pivotal about a leader and about a person of great power in a situation like the presidency of the United States. I think it's a pivotal thing. A character means everything. And that's the way through the self-serving venture, is centering yourself on what's the right thing. So I think that's in the context of what I struggle to do. How does that relate to the other things in the book? Well, I'm not too sure it does. They are explorations of conjectures that have puzzled people and puzzled me. I think there actually is a famous line in a current film which is up for an Academy Award, and I hope it gets it because it well deserves it. It's called Conclave. And the tagline is that certainty is the enemy of unity. And certainty is the enemy of many things. It's certainly the enemy of invention. It's the people that puzzle over things that are not certain about things, that entertain a certain amount of craziness that benefits the most in society, that invent things, that change the world the way we know them. Certainly the great scientists of the time have been pointing off in terms of everyday people. So, yeah, I think the lack of certainty around in something that guides you is very important. It's important in war, certainly it's important in everyday life. It's the way to find yourself, I think, through life, which is basically complexity. It's all complexity. If you try to simplify it too much, you miss the point.
Absolutely. Well, I understand that Conclave won the BAFTA Award,
Did that.
Best Film recently.
You may even notice the posters behind me.
I see
I've
that.
been a long-term staff member of the Telluride Film Festival.
Terrific.
Conclave was reared there, actually. So I've seen it there first, but I've shown it to neighbors and friends many times. If you haven't seen it, see it. It's a pivotal film. It's just got a lot of depth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What at the end of the day, Larry, if a reader reads your book, they put it down, what do you hope they take with them? Is it to learn more about your thoughts on some conjectures or your conjectures, or perhaps to spark their own conjectures about the world around us?
I think the thing that's most satisfying to me is a friend of mine who tells me that she reads one chapter a night, thinks about it, and calls me up to talk about it. That, I think, is exactly what I tried to do. Get people to think about things, to not accept pat answers, to keep an open mind, to remember that things are very complex.
Absolutely. And I think that's all any of us could ask from a book or from a movie, for that matter, is to make us think. And to get a book and to get a movie that makes you think, it's something special. So perfect. What was the most challenging part of writing the book, Larry?
You have to say this is probably not supposed to be said by an author, but I didn't set out to write a book. I did set out to write something for my grandchildren about Vietnam. That I was a conscious effort on my part. The rest were organizations of my own thoughts that I had spent some time thinking about. I'll make a comment on the foreword of the book that the book is dedicated to my wife, who had to endure my absences as I was lost in thought. She used to tease me about that. So I think I wouldn't say there was a lot of difficulty. It just flowed onto paper. It just happened. I think the most surprising thing to me with this whole exercise is that I've had a number of reviews, most of them positive, some maybe not so, but I didn't imagine that it would be for everybody anyway. But the common thing that I hear from almost everybody is it's well written. That surprised me. I've never considered myself a writer. Maybe a mathematician, but not a writer. So I think the writing was spontaneous, the flow of my own thoughts onto paper. I'm a good organizer, so maybe that helped along the way.
Well, I suspect that the reason the book is so well done is because it does come from your thinking and your heart, your feelings about things. You're not a writer. That's the beauty of it. You didn't set out to write a book. That's the beauty of it. Perfect. Larry, do you feel like that was the one book that you had in you, or has it inspired you to continue thinking and continue writing?
Well, that's an interesting thought. Somebody last night told me, what's your next book? And I don't think I really thought that. Yeah, I've considered it a singular effort. I think if it goes anywhere, or if it becomes a success in some way, I think I would consider following it up. I don't know what the subject matter would be. Maybe more essays about things that intrigue me. I don't know. It's a genre unto itself. I think that's been fed back to me. There's a lot of people that write a book quite disjointed, if I can put it that way, or a combination or a collection of things that do not appear to have a common theme other than just puzzles or, questions. I don't know, to be honest with you.
That's a fair answer.
I'm along for the ride. I want to see where it goes.
Well, we're sure glad you're along.
I'm sorry.
We're certainly all so sure. We're all glad that you're along for the ride, and that through your writing, you've allowed us all to partake in your conjectures and your thoughts about things.
Well, thank you for that.
Larry, early on, you mentioned the greatest generation. There's a lot of talk these days about perhaps the country has lost its way, or we're not quite sure who we are as much as we used to be. Without getting into politics, do you have any thoughts on perhaps the unity that the country felt during say, World War II, where everyone was on board with what we were doing. There wasn't dissent. There was kind of like one for all for one, versus today, perhaps, where there's just so many different interests, so many people running so many different ways. And your thoughts on that?
Well, I think to some extent I may have touched on that in the essays on spirituality, and maybe even partly in the other one on free will. There are cultural aspects to our moral construct. I think what's going on today is a demonstration of how the things seem to divide us rather than draw us together. We're community oriented. One of the things that I prepared to talk about based on your questions was, and I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in Missouri, and that's a very individualistic culture out there. I spent a lot of time on the Appalachian Trail honing survival skills. I sort of come at it from the individual point of view, but my wife was very much of the social environment and the social culture. She complemented me in so many ways because she made associations and people important in ways that they weren't before. A mix of culture. You can distill that into East and West, into individual, into community types of cultures, or that kind of thing. I think the things that draw us together are when we're attacked, we begin to recognize what our keys are. We've lost sight of that. I think we've lost sight of the fact that democracy is about compromise and not about contest. And I think that our institutions are in peril. And again, trying not to get into politics here, but I think we have to lose certainty. Get back to tag phrase again. And ponder openness to the mind, see it a different way, see a different point of view, explore somebody else's thinking instead of being so sure about ourselves. So I think these things are playing out in our society today, and I'm sorry to see it because I think we don't need to be attacked, but I think we do need to understand that we need each other, and that we are part of a whole. That's the individual saying the community is important to us.
Absolutely.
I came across very intelligently, but that's part of what thinking. Yeah.
Absolutely. Great thoughts. And I think we need each other is more true today than ever.
Yes.
Absolutely agree. As we get to the close of our talk, Larry, any closing thoughts that you have for our listeners and viewers today?
I would have one thing I would like to say, and that is embrace the craziness. And I'll put that in a little bit of context. I participated as a professional engineer with some high school robotics teams. The trained engineers were very quick to say, well, that can't be done. And it became evident to me it was the crazy ideas that were really winning the concept. So I say to people, don't be certain. Embrace a little bit of craziness because that's where invention is. That is the heart of novelty. So in the film that we talked about, it was certainty is the enemy of unity. I would say that certainty is the enemy of invention. So I will leave it with that. Embrace craziness because it's where invention is.
I love it. I think that's a perfect saying for this Thursday morning. Embrace craziness. Larry, I assume that your book is available on Amazon and at retailers for folks who are looking to pick up a copy?
Yes, it is.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Larry. It's been a wonderful discussion. We've been talking with Larry Lambelet, author of Musings, Vietnam, Conjectures, and more. Absolutely solid insights and fascinating topic, and I've really enjoyed our discussion today, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners have as well, Larry. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, John. Good talking to you.
You too. Thank you. You've been listening to the BrightWord Books Podcast. home of the literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss future episodes. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.